This is Seaborn from Winning at Home. Welcome to In Progress, a podcast about faith, life, and how we grow. And for this episode, I am pretty excited. I have kind of a cool, unique, for me especially, situation here. If you've listened to more than a couple episodes of the podcast, you've heard me talk about Annaliese. And today, I get to record with her here in the studio. So, hey, Annaliese, this is my wife. If this is the first episode you've listened to, you have no idea who she is. This is Annaliese. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you. It's awesome to be here. It's unique and special for me, too.
Nice. So people have heard about you. You know, I talk a little bit here and there and whatever. I don't know if you've listened to all the episodes. No issue if you haven't. But I, mention our things that we're working through and the things that we're figuring out as a couple, mostly from my perspective. I'm talking about the things that marriage is teaching me as a person and the ways that lines up with what God's doing in my life. And so today we thought it would be cool. We've actually been talking about the idea of doing an episode together for a couple months, you think?
Yeah, it has been, yeah.
And as we tried to figure out, okay, what does that look like? We kicked around a couple different ideas of talking about maybe one bigger thing more in depth. And we talked about that and realized we probably will do that at some point to talk about some of the continual communication, especially. You'll hear as we talk today that communication is one of the huge areas where we have grown, but where we still have a lot that we need to grow in together, of figuring out each other's language and what it means when she says something. You've heard, Stephen and I talked about that recently, and I shared some of the stuff about Annaliese and I. So we kicked around some ideas, and we thought maybe for this intro, this is the first time you're hearing from Annaliese. It's the first time Annaliese is getting a chance to share her side of things at all. And so we thought it would be probably a more appropriate first introduction to kind of do, instead of one big heavy thing, to do some kind of quick hitter type of stuff, to talk about a few different things that we've realized have, as simple as they sound, have made almost a disproportionate impact on our relationship. And so we're going to talk about a few of the changes, a few of the realizations that on the surface maybe don't even sound like that big of a deal, but that have made a huge difference in the way that we interact with each other, in the way that we feel cared for and valued by each other. And so that's what I've asked Annaliese to really share about. I realized I've talked a lot in this little intro of what we're going to talk about. So Annaliese, I want to throw this over to you and just talk about a few of these quick hitter ideas. I don't know why I like that phrase. It's a pretty dumb phrase, but it is kind of catchy in my head.
It's like a hook.
Yeah, right? On accident. So anyway, a few of those things that we talked about. Go for it. I'll jump in as needed. Perfect. And but I want people to hear from you.
Yeah, great. There's obviously my brain kind of explodes with all of the things that marriage has brought up. I know that, Alan was talking about you can see a lot of change in yourself too. It's, I don't know, for me, it's brought up a ton. I feel like marriage for me has been just built-in accountability almost. So I'm sort of in a position now where I need to run all of my normal process and my normal communication and just the way that I just take for granted just the way that I naturally do stuff. So it's very interesting. So that's really brought up a couple things.
Yeah, that's something that I've talked about a few times in different episodes. I can't think of them offhand, but how, both of us, when we met, I think I was 27, you were 28, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about
I
the
am
fact,
older, just so everybody knows.
yeah, if you think about the fact that we had both been doing life on our own for that long, and we've established these patterns of, well, this is what it looks like for me to be a person and for me to be an adult living on my own. And now all of a sudden, you're jumping into this thing where you're saying, hey, I've agreed to partner up with somebody else, and it turns out that their normal way of doing things and my normal way of doing things are maybe not even at odds. That feels a little too adversarial,
right.
But they don't mesh.
They don't mesh.
Yeah.
We're not connecting, and we both know we're trying 100%. It was not a question for me in those times, like especially in the very beginning, that you cared or that you were trying.
Wait,
or that I cared
in the very beginning? What is
well,
that
yeah, like before we could work on any of this stuff,
right.
Like when it all started happening, I knew you were trying just as much as I was trying, and that was almost more frustrating because we weren't making breakthroughs.
Yeah, it wasn't for lack of effort.
Yeah,
it genuinely felt like we were coming from the same thing at such different angles and using such different words to describe the same thing.
Yeah.
That it was really jarring. Like I've talked to you about this a number of times that, for me, I looked and I would have said, hey, I'd say our relationship like 8 out of 10. We've got moments where there's conflict, where there's misunderstanding, where there's disappointments. But overall, this has been smooth and it's been pretty simple, because, I've talked about this before, I think a little bit of I've felt misunderstood. I've felt like the things I try to communicate to people aren't always what is communicated to people. And I've felt that way. It feels weird. Like I'm like, oh, poor me. But it feels like the natural way that I've experienced communication with people is that I'm misunderstood a fair amount of the time. And so when it came out, in our relationship, I felt like, wow, instead of being misunderstood 40% of the time, like I am usually in my life, I'm misunderstood 10% of the time by you. And so this is amazing. This is like not just the best like romantic relationship I've ever been in. This is the best relationship I've ever been in. A person to person thing. And from your perspective, you were like, man, I really haven't had this degree of miscommunication with people.
Yes. I was like appalled that I was doing such a terrible job in my estimate. That's kind of how I felt, because I've always considered myself a good communicator. When you talk about the proportion that you've always felt sort of misunderstood by people, mine would be a fraction of that.
Yeah.
And I recognize, now more than ever from like I took the Enneagram, and you eventually did too. And
yeah, if you've listened to that episode,
that took a minute, which is fine.
I took it early, but
right,
bought
true.
Into it much later.
Great point. But yeah, it's just a lot clearer. Part of that is a natural wiring thing. You weren't, again, it's not that you weren't trying. It was that my language, okay, so you guys, I'm sure, have all heard of like the love languages, and I totally get the impact and benefit of that. And that's awesome. But it's funny because we had to get even more basic. We needed to figure out what's each other's language, just in general, like to communicate normal, natural things. And so, so when Alan would hear me talk about my perspective of the relationship, I was just very aware this is very hard work. It's hard work for me. I'm trying to figure out like 5 different ways to say something where I normally would have to figure out maybe 3 tops, because we're naturally wired so very differently, and we need to communicate about a lot of different things and a lot of serious things, like, life stuff that you share with your partner. So yeah, it was very interesting. For me, it was not a bad relationship. It's the healthiest relationship I've ever been in by far. There's a consistency and a steadiness there, and I know that we're on the same page in all the core stuff, the stuff that really matters. It's just a matter of like literally, like I was saying, the general communication style was just not working, not connecting.
For sure. And it's awesome to know like, hey, the foundation is here, the security is here. I know that this is a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make it any easier.
Yes.
When in the moment there are, pretty major miscommunications and misunderstandings talking about things that are really basic and really normal.
Very basic and normal. So like one example for you guys of just how concretely, or practically that showed up like in our day-to-day. What I realized from taking the Enneagram and from Alan going over with me his results too of his wiring. So for those of you who know the Enneagram, I'm a 2, which is a helper. And I have a really strong 3-wing, but it still places me solidly in the emotional triad. Mm-hmm. And then so Alan is a 5 so he's an investigator, which is very much in the thinking triad. And that could mean nothing on the surface if you aren't going through like the day-to-day examples of where this stuff shows up, because I'm a very ideas and emotional communicator. Like I communicate general ideas. It's always been hard for me, like even in like creative writing class in like middle school and high school. My teachers would be like, how about concrete examples? And I'm like, concrete examples? Like, how many of those do you really need? So I'm always just sort of this general communicator. I like to talk about the big picture, and it's a challenge for me to step it back and give really factual info. But guess what I found out? That's the exact thing that Alan is looking for in a conversation about something.
Kind of the only thing I'm looking for.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of these things too is like he views a conversation as information collecting.
It's an exchange of information.
It's an exchange of information. For me, I'm like, for me, it's connection. And that's primary. And so when I heard him, like when we've uncovered these little bits of like, what is it that makes us so different here? It's been so illuminating. And I'm like, you know what? Just as much as I value my own process and I believe in my own process, to really respect and value you as my partner, I need to respect and value you have your own process. And whether or not I can empathize with it, I need to at least get to a place where I'm like, I understand and get that this is you being on purpose. This is how you communicate on purpose. And so I came across this piece of info, I think it was last year. I don't remember from where, so sorry, I know I should credit it to someone, but it's emotions are data. So this idea literally blew the top of my head off. I was like, what is that? What does that mean? That sounds like the key to unlock a lot of my own processing. I mean, I was spinning my wheels trying to figure out how many different ways to say something. But when I heard about this concept, emotions are data, and started to really like explore what that looked like, for me, what it looked like was recognizing that my emotions are a signpost and they point me to a deeper value that I have. Okay, so let's just say it's a negative emotion, because that's often what we have issues with.
Sure.
So the negative emotion, it's pointing me to a value that I have deeper inside that I feel like is being threatened. So I can't just say to you, I don't know, I'm just really, really frustrated right now. And, I don't know, this is really hard. Because you can tell that, and you're also off-put
Sure, yeah.
by my emotions.
I already know that you're frustrated.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious when I get frustrated. So I needed to do a couple steps extra and just say to Alan, you know what? I need to take a second because I'm feeling this super strong emotion, and I need to figure out what this is pointing to. So, I would need to dig deep and say, what's happening that we're talking about right now where I don't feel like I'm being supported or affirmed? Or usually for me, a negative emotion comes up when I don't feel like I'm able to say my piece clearly, or when I don't feel like the other person is connecting it, because connection is my biggest thing. So I want to be on the same page in a conversation. That's number one priority. Mm-hmm. So I need to figure out what the info is that I'm trying to communicate to Alan. So I dig deeper with this negative emotion, and I'm like, okay, I think what's going on here is I feel hurt because I feel like I am, for instance, I had an opinion about this topic, and I feel like I communicated it, but then you maybe glossed it over and skip to something else as if I didn't even contribute something. So I'd like to take a step back to that piece and hear what your feedback is about that. That's what I really feel hurt by. I feel like we didn't spend any time on my contribution. So that's just a way that shows up. So then when I dig all that up, I can then come back and say, okay, Alan, I think what was going on here is I didn't feel like we spent enough time on the info that I was giving and the piece I was trying to contribute to this. And then he has something to work with,
right?
Instead of my general vague frustration, which makes total sense, right? He doesn't know exactly what I'm trying to get at in the moment. So that kind of thing has been really just honestly mind-blowingly different.
Yeah. And, as you're describing that, I was thinking about, for me, what that has felt like to be on the other end of things, of you're trying to figure out, as a primarily emotionally wired person, how to communicate with a primarily thinking-minded person. I'm doing the opposite. And what I started out as is as soon as emotions get involved in this conversation, I feel like I'm being manipulated. And I feel like, oh, now you're crying. Yeah, so now I'm the bad guy, and now I'm the jerk, and now, I have to take on the fault and responsibility for all of this. And I had to figure out, and I would say, as a result of seeing her trying to meet me halfway, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I probably should do something here to meet more toward the middle, that I can't just, as soon as emotions show up, I can't just write it off as oh, come on, why now you're doing this to try to your point can't stand on its own, so you're bringing in this thing.
Yeah, it felt like I was using that as a red herring or a crutch or something, just something to throw in there to make you do something, when in fact it's a part of the package of what I go through and in communication and in myself, inside myself. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say for both of us, I don't know, maybe I should just speak for me, but for both of us, just knowing this doesn't make it better or easier in the moment, right? Because there are still times when we both go back to our natural thing. And, there was, I can't remember if Steven said it in the most recent podcast we did, or if he shared, I know he shared it at our Winning at Home premarital event. He said toward the end of his talk, where he's talking to newly married and engaged couples, and he said, that's really important to remember that concepts, learning a new concept doesn't bring change. Actually, putting it into practice brings change. And I would say that there are some times that knowing these concepts has really helped us a lot in our moments of trying to communicate, because we're applying it. We're actively putting it into practice. And then other times we theoretically know the concept, right? But it's just like, well, yeah, but I don't want to mess with that right now because I'm so frustrated, or I'm so right, or I'm so whatever.
It feels like a lot of extra to have to do when you're caught up in that moment and you just want it to be done immediately. That's just the overwhelming feeling. And it shows up different for both of us. But yeah.
Yeah, and even for you to say that, you just want it to be done immediately. That's what your goal is when we're in that moment of conflict. My goal is, I don't care how long it takes. We need to reach some sort of a natural resolution or ending point or something.
And I will feel like gross if we don't closure it. So
no,
there's
I'm
that
not
like
saying
later.
that. I'm just saying that's another layer of perspective of, in your mind, it's like, okay, what's the quickest route we can get from here to being done with it? And I'm going, what's the most thorough route between here and when we can have this moment resolved?
Yeah.
You know, and that's actually, I didn't mean to do this,
I know.
but I
it's like an exact segue.
Perfectly fed into, what's the second thing that we were going to talk about?
Yeah, so the other point is this actually was one of the first exact examples that I was like shocked to find from looking into the Enneagram, just that application for our relationship more, because what they do on their website too, which is enneagraminstitute.com, but they have like a training section in their menu where they have just a ton of just extra information. And one of those pieces is type dynamics, which talks about what happens when this type is in a relationship with this type. And one of their examples for Alan and I, so for the 5 and the 2, because they talk about, hey, this is what this couple looks like when they're like dynamic and they're just operating at their healthiest. And then it talks about, here's some pitfalls that can happen when both, possibly are stressed out, or not even that. It's just, these are some of the differences they can encounter. So
if I do things my way and you do things your way, what do we run into?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was so funny because I think we were working on some kind of house stuff at the time. And
sounds right. It's kind of been life for the last couple of years, right?
Let's call that what it is.
Yeah.
The whole 5 years-ish we've been married.
Yeah.
So we were literally working on some kind of physical, actual project in our house, and I was finding it challenging to do a project alongside of you because of how I felt about your reaction, I guess, to the work that I was doing. And so I literally read in this description, it said something like, well, the 5, which is Alan, is like all about hitting the details. And like he just said, being thorough. And he wants to get the job done, and he wants to get the job done well. The 2 wants to get the job done as well, but the 2 wants to just get the job done. So the 5 is often going to see the 2 in those actual real life examples and be like, why are you trying to hack this and take a shortcut?
Take shortcuts,
like,
cut corners.
Yeah.
Those were the phrases that jumped out when you read that to me. I was like, well, yeah, I feel like you're taking shortcuts, not a lot, but when we're in these moments, it's
right.
like.
And I'm kind of hurt, like, we have like 20 of these projects to do. Like, do you want any of this to be done? Like, I'm trying to help.
Yeah.
And, it was just a weird little thing that we needed to get through. But to recognize, hey, we're not like the only special couple in the universe that's dealing with this kind of thing. And here are some real practical reasons why this is coming up.
And to realize that either of us left to our own devices, like if I only do things my way, it kind of makes me think of there was a neighbor that we had in the house that I lived in when I was maybe in like second grade-ish, in like a 5-year period around there. I don't that's as specific as I can be. But the entire time that we lived in that home, the family's house was under construction to some degree. And I believe for at least 3 of those years, there was not a workable kitchen in the house.
Oh, my word.
Because the project was being undertaken by somebody probably, right, who's like me, just left totally unchecked. And if you go through life like I would naturally on my own, of saying, and we even had it this past week, there was a thing where I said, walking through the house that I did almost all the painting in. My dad helped out a good bit with the upstairs, but it was a lot of me painting. And I would see something and go, I hate that line is a little bit off, or, I hate that there's a little crack in this part of the thing that I patched. And Annaliese is going, yeah, it's 100-year-old house, and it's the middle of winter, and of course there's going to be settling, there's going to be a little cracking. Oh, I can't even tell that line isn't painted perfectly. We had someone over the other night, and she's like, man, did you have somebody professionally paint this? And in my mind, I'm like, either she doesn't know anything about painting, or she's just really trying to butter us up, because this does not look like a professional painted it. Like, I tried, I spent a lot of time, but no, not professional. And I'll always be able to find something where I could go back and I could do it over and I could do it a little bit better. Or I can take apart part of what I've done and try to do it better over and over and over. So you leave me unchecked, and I could spend genuine, I don't think I'm overstating this, I probably could spend a month or 2 months maybe just on the painting of the house.
Yeah, that's the part where I say, no, I don't think you're overstating that.
Right. Yeah. And if Annaliese was left unchecked to say, okay, the goal here is to get stuff done, then it would be kind of the opposite thing, right?
It would look a little jankier.
Yeah. People would look
a little less
nobody would
put together. Yeah.
Accidentally think that you hired somebody to paint. They go, oh yeah, you did this yourself, huh? You were in a hurry to get in, right?
Great job. Yeah.
And so the point here is you leave either person unchecked to do things their way, and they get too far down that road, and it looks kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
And what has been the real challenge for us is to try to figure out, okay, yeah, I get why you're pushing back on saying, hey, I don't need to be patching every little thing. I don't need to be doing all this stuff over and over and over. But that is kind of me. And so to say, all right, you're right, it's good enough. Where does compromise come in, and where does, I want to be comfortable in my own house, right? So I want to not see this weird thing on the wall every single time I walk by it, and it just drives me crazy.
Right.
Now, should it, in a rational world, would it? No. Probably not. But guess what? I'm
That's
me.
you.
I'm not like a computer, and it's the same for Annaliese. We have to work through this stuff, where if me and the way that I think is just allowed to go run wild on anything of the way I view the world only, it's going to eventually cause some problems. And the same happens with Annaliese. And what we found is we get to, in some ways, balance each other out that way. When you go, hey, I know this is what you would naturally do on your own, but I want to invite you to see it from this other perspective where it's good enough. That's what Annaliese needs to tell me. And I need to sometimes say, hey, it needs to be a little better.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just going to say, that makes me think exactly of another thing that's been healing for me, to embrace as an individual in our relationship, is something that my counselor talked to me about, hey, no matter what this looks like, you need to keep showing up. You need to keep showing up. And to me, that meant as much as we flex with each other, and we do need to find compromise and shared things that we're coming to because of each other's impact, it is important to keep showing up with my wiring and my strengths and my contributions. And the same for you. And I was going to say, thank God you do what you do very clearly and from a very clear perspective and mindset and worldview, because I know exactly when I need your set of strengths for me, and I need to tap into that. Like, you're my advice guy for so many things that I would kind of probably waffle on, but because I know that you're very concrete and factual and logical, I'm just like, man, that's such a huge asset for me. So it is important to retain yourself, but keep showing up, and to retain yourself and keep showing up while respecting and valuing your partner and doing the work.
And that's the really unique thing, isn't it? Is that it's like, yeah, this is what's needed to keep showing up. And that's a blessing and a curse, right?
It's a dance. It's it's weird.
That's the huge value that I bring, but that's also the moments of conflict that I bring when I come and say, oh, hang on, let's think about that from another perspective.
Yeah.
That's not always met with excitement, right? I mean, everybody that's ever been on either end, the giving or receiving end,
right,
of, hey, let's think about this from another perspective. You know that when you invite somebody else to do it, it's not always met with excitement and acceptance. And you know when other people invite you to do it, it's not always met that way either. Because being not told to change, being invited to change, being invited to see that there's something in me that I can grow in.
Yeah.
Something that if I let another way of thinking in, that it would really enhance the way that I do things, the way that I view the world.
Right.
It's still a letting go of something.
Yeah.
And no matter who you are, no matter what you do, that's just hard. That's just hard.
Yeah.
And, I think that that's a huge component of doing life with a partner.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful, Annaliese, for the way that you balance out some of the things that I would run wild on. And I've seen a lot of positive change in me as a result of being open to sharing life with you.
Yeah.
There have been sacrifices, there have been frustrations, there have been things that I've had to figure out how to let go of that I don't want to have let go of.
Yeah.
Is that a thing? I don't know how to say that.
That's a real thing. Yeah.
But, it's been such a growth and beneficial journey that, I'm really grateful that we've worked in those moments of frustration to say, okay, but what are we really getting at here?
Yeah, same. I just have so appreciated, like we said, in the very beginning of our relationship, we really were aware, like, man, this is a person who is doing life. At that time, we didn't know the degree of how differently, but is doing life in a different way than me, but I see God through them. That's how I felt with you. Yeah. And I want to say the same thing. Like, I just have so appreciated the consistency and steadiness. And that's the thing about having a partner, that you can trust to take care of their own stuff and to be open And that's kind of it. That's kind of all you can do at first, because the work is the work.
Right.
But thank you for being steady like that. I've appreciated that so much.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And I, even as we're doing this, I'm kind of thinking it might feel weird that you're kind of hearing, as you're listening, you're hearing us talk about some stuff, but then also like talk to each other and trying to figure out how to navigate that. But the reason why we had this moment of talking to each other is because it's a real thing that we've been working through and on and will continue to do. And like I say, unless Annaliese really hated this experience, I plan on in the future digging into some more bigger, deeper, maybe heavier. I don't know the way to describe it, but instead of sort of
more
these
process stuff.
Yeah, instead of these sort of quick little, hey, here's this, here's this, here's this. And having said that, I'm mindful of the time. Annaliese has about another maybe 15 minutes before she's got to get back.
Nice.
But do you want to hit that third thing that did we kind of already cover it?
I mean, we kind of covered it. Let's see, communication, conversation, work. Yeah, guys, these are the main topics that I had. I mean, some of these really just integrate together and that was kind of seamlessly. Yeah. So, I mean, one thing leads to another. You'll see too, and I'm sure you've already experienced too for yourselves in some ways, that when you spend energy that you feel like is really outside of your normal and outside of your comfort zone, that's going to be blessed, because that's going to show up in other areas too. Like, I realize when I'm open, like Alan was talking about, like just being open to another mindset, it like increases your awareness that, hey, that might help me next time, or that might help me in this other scenario. If I'm just open to hearing another way of doing this, that might help. I might actually have more choices than I thought I did. Once
you kind of learn to see a thing from somebody else's perspective, right? I mean,
even if it doesn't come naturally to you.
It feels weird to say that, like, hey, two adults that are kind of learning what it looks like to do this. But you do find that it colors other relationships too, because, I find myself going, okay, Annaliese, someone that I really deeply respect and care about, has just a completely different way of viewing a lot of things in life than I do. And you go, okay, so if that's true for her, then it's probably true for some of these other people that I'm in moments of, maybe not even conflict, but just you're looking and you're just so confused. You're like, why are they doing that? That doesn't make any sense. And then if you can apply across this relationship as well, what you've kind of learned of like, oh, okay, well, hang on, when, and this is kind of the way that we learn, isn't it? And this is what you hear people talking about and being frustrated about, of like, hey, nobody really seems to care about anything until it directly impacts their life. And when you see this impact in, I'm going to look at something from another person's point of view, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, because I believe that Annaliese is on my team, and I believe that we're doing this together and overcoming the barriers ahead of us alongside each other, instead of she's creating the barrier by the way that she thinks, or I'm creating the barrier by the way that I think. If we start to practice that in our relationship with our significant other, then we start to be open to, like you're talking about, to seeing that in other moments, in other relationships, and the growth, not in our marriage, but the growth that we see as people, of going, oh, it would be possible for somebody to have a radically different way of approaching this moment than me. And they could be trying to come at this with genuine effort too. Like it's kind of weird, right?
It is weird. It's like you're raising like a whole level of what you're aware is happening in a interaction.
Yeah.
Or in an observation too. You know, you could just be observing and be thinking all this stuff subconsciously. And it's weird when you raise that to your awareness and you're like, oh, wow, I guess I was thinking that. But due to the new like work and energy I've been putting into like communicating with my partner on some levels that were different, like I'm just like, okay, like I guess that could apply here too. It's just weird. It really does open up your capacity to be a better communicator. And that's, like I've told you before, like, Alan, thank you so much for being you. Oh, as frustrating as it is sometimes for me to be like, in what other way could I communicate? Like, in what other way could I get us through this spot?
Yeah.
I need Alan to be Alan because that helps me remember I'm not the star of the show here. Like, I need to work out how to connect with anyone to a degree, really. But it really helps me.
Yeah, and that's kind of the reminder from, I think, a lot of what we're talking about is that in meshing two lives together, I don't know, that's a bad word for it, but, help me come
integrating,
up with it. Yeah,
like
integrating.
really integrating.
Thank you, that's good. Yeah. Integrating two lives together it's going to mean figuring out how to navigate through the moments of conflict and miscommunication and confrontation, because that's part of it. Like that's not a negative side effect that only if you're doing things wrong in your relationship will you run into this stuff.
Exactly.
This is just what it looks like for two people who care about things, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time when you run into conflict, it's over something that matters to you to some degree.
Yeah.
And part of the deal is if you care about something and you have in your head, okay, this is the way forward, and somebody else who cares about it too has a different idea about the way forward,
right?
Then conflict and confrontation and misunderstanding and frustration, that's just kind of the natural outflow of that situation. And to realize that that's part of the deal, that that's part of what it looks like to sign up for marriage, to sign up for spending life together with somebody.
Yeah.
If you have gotten caught up in worrying about, hey, we don't think exactly the same way. We don't go about things exactly the same way.
Right.
If you went into it with the understanding of, hey, we're just basically the same person, and now we're just going to be two of us together doing our thing. Then running into these moments of conflict and confrontation and disappointment and all that can really throw you off guard. And you go, wait, is there something wrong with this relationship? It's like, oh, the honeymoon period is over. What's happening now? Did I marry the wrong person? Am I, am I building my life with somebody that is just incompatible with me and I can't really build a life with them?
And that's the thing, right? Because I feel like a lot of these things maybe go unsaid. They go unspelled out. I literally need things spelled out. Like, I need an example in front of me. Like, sometimes I'm just not following, and I need step-by-step spelled out because, like I was saying in the very beginning, I'm big picture. I don't tend to break that down in the steps that are followable right now. So if I'm far behind, I need those next couple steps spelled out. And I think that's so, so important before you just throw the whole idea out if you're experiencing conflict and regular conflict almost, or even misunderstanding, regular misunderstanding, because that stuff is really undermining to the value that you guys are actually building in other ways.
Yeah.
And so just to explain it, to take a couple minutes to explain it to each other of, I guess this is my expectation. This is how I feel like it's not happening. Where are you at? You just, ask each other, where are you at with this stuff?
Yeah. And if this is a conversation that each of you in your own way have tried to initiate before,
yes,
and you haven't gotten anywhere, you've heard, if you've listened to a few of the episodes I did with Stephen, you know that that's the counselor that Annaliese and I see together.
Right.
And we found that was a big boost, a big step of helping some of these conversations where we would kind of start at it a little bit, and then it was too frustrating or too difficult or too...
For me, it almost felt like I was doing something wrong. And I know that I know that you did an episode, right, about my family of origin, your family of origin, right? So, that was why. It's because in my family, any kind of difference of opinion, maybe you talked about it, but you never would land on an entirely opposite point that the other person was trying to make. So you definitely talk it through. But that was why I never pushed through those moments when maybe I felt like I should. I know I need to work on being assertive. And I was just going to say that too. Like when we went to counseling, I didn't realize I was like, all right, I wonder what he's going to tell Alan to change here, because I know that I'm trying like the hardest I can think to try and like all of the ideas I can think to try. I didn't realize I was being that guy, going into couples counseling, like, I've pretty much done my stuff. But when those things came up, it was almost sometimes absurdly simple. And exactly like what you were talking about before about, what Alan was talking about before. Sorry, I'm looking at him, which you can't see. About like concepts don't make the difference. You working that stuff out practically is what makes the difference. And I realized I knew I needed to be assertive. I just needed to push through the uncomfortable feeling of I'm not comfortable. I don't like the way that this makes me feel because I'm differing from you, and I need to continue to press my point and explain my point. In a calm, rational way, right? It's not like barreling through or steamrolling. But I did realize I needed to do that. So that was big.
I think that...
And counseling is what helped with that. Sorry, really quick.
That's good. Yeah. That's where I was going to
yes.
kind of land as we wrap up and just say, if you're listening and you go, hey, we've been dealing with some of the same stuff or some of the similar ideas that you're talking about here in this episode, and we've tried to talk about it and it didn't really get us anywhere.
Right.
Us too.
Right, exactly.
And this, this isn't like, oh, this is the first time we're talking about this stuff, and this is just really easy for us to talk about.
Yeah.
This, to be able to even share some of the stuff that we have here, it would have been way too personal, way too raw, way too close to home.
Right.
Until we started seeing a counselor.
Yeah.
And we're able to actually talk it through and disconnect not the emotion from it, but the chargedness of any of these individual topics.
Right.
Because we were able to figure out, why does this conversation keep happening the same not good way?
Exactly.
And what can we do to turn this around so that we're working toward understanding, even though it's what we both want, that's not what's happening in the moment.
Exactly.
And for us, seeing a counselor made a huge, huge difference in just unblocking a couple things. And it was wild. Like I forget if it was the first or second session that we wound up standing outside of the counseling office in the little breezeway for another 35 or 40 minutes, I bet.
Yeah, at least, because I couldn't deal. I had to keep talking it through. It just brought up so much.
Yeah, it opened up some stuff, and it's like, these are things that we've been trying to talk about but we kept not being able to, or not being willing to, or not knowing how to is probably the best way to say it.
Not knowing how, or like I was saying, not pushing through that uncomfortableness to do what you know to do.
Yeah.
It helped me get clear on it, what the right things were to try, instead of trying to scattershot like anything.
And it just, it made a big difference for us. And so if you're listening and you're like, hey, all that sounds kind of cool, but we've tried it and it's not taking for us. There's not something wrong, weird about you. That's normal stuff. We would really encourage you, from our experience, it made a huge impact, to talk with a counselor about that stuff.
Right.
And it really has opened up communication for us to understand the way to talk to each other about these areas of conflict. And like we've said multiple times, it hasn't made it perfect, hasn't made it easy to do this.
Right.
But it's made it doable.
It's made it purposeful.
Yeah.
I know I'm focused on the right energy, and that gives me satisfaction. It really does. Even in the hard stuff, it gives me satisfaction to know I'm doing the right things the right way. And that's the other thing, is putting into practice. Even if you have seen a counselor and maybe that didn't work, think about maybe some of the concepts that maybe didn't make its way into your daily routine. That might be something really good to try too. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Annaliese, thanks for joining me. This has been fun to have you here hanging out. Yay.
And I look forward to doing it again at some point in the future.
Great. Thanks for having me.